So this new theatre piece that we are doing, this music theatre production, is a collaborative effort between Zangam Choir, Klapstuk, which is the Dario for Theatre Corps, and the New European Ensemble, along with musicians who play Indian music. So we are also together with 7 dancers from India and the Netherlands. So this is a very nice collaborative effort which brings together Indian poetry, ancient Indian Sanskrit poetry, and Indian traditional music along with Western classical music. So we tell the story of cloud messenger or Meghdoot as it is called in Sanskrit. We are interpreting it through music and dance in this collaboration. Sanskrit poetry is very old, and this particular one called Meghdoot was written something like 2000 years ago by one of the greatest Sanskrit poets of India, Kalidas. It's a classic. I studied this when I was doing my Sanskrit masters. I fell in love with the poetry. It's a very imaginative, beautiful piece of work, very creative. And I've always wondered what it would be like to interpret this poetry through Indian music. Since my training is in classical Indian music, I thought of telling the story of Meghdoot or Cloud Messenger through Indian music in Indian ragas. So I chose a few verses, 14 verses from the original Sanskrit poetry, and I set them to a composition which is in the style of a rag mala or a garland of rags. Each verse is in a different rag. And I also discovered that 100 years ago, a British composer called Gustav Holst was also inspired by this poem, and he also composed a Western classical choral music with the same poetry, where he wrote his own words. And he interpreted the same poetry in a Western classical style. So we thought, why don't we combine the two, the Indian classical and the Western classical, and create a new way of telling the story and bringing this poetry back to life. important today, especially because loneliness, isolation is a universal emotion that everyone goes through. And the story of Cloud Messenger is based on this loneliness, on this feeling of separation. And we have all gone through it recently, 2 years ago, when we had Corona, and worldwide we had lockdowns. So I think it's important, connection between people is important, efforts to make a connection between people is important, and this poetry represents exactly that. Separated yaksha, separated from his wife, is trying to send a message of love through the cloud. Don't we all use a virtual cloud to communicate with our loved ones nowadays? And it's important to build bridges. So the synthesis between Indian music and Western music is also important from that point of view. We're building a bridge. We're looking at common elements between the two styles of music, which are very different. But in our project, we have successfully combined all these elements. And it's an exciting and inspiring project to work on. So Kalidas, being one of the most famous Sanskrit poets, it is very important to bring this poetry back to life. Very few people read and understand Sanskrit poetry. So what better way to bring it alive, bring it back to life than through music and dance. So this is the main idea, and Kalidas's life and work, his work is very well known. You can find it translated in all the different languages. In the 18th and 19th centuries, his poetry was translated into European languages and also captured the imagination of the Europeans. Many scholars have spent entire lifetimes studying Kalidasa's poetry. His details of his life as a poet are not known, but his works are still existing and they are immortalized. So I think it's important to reintroduce his poetry back to the public through music and dance.